Sarah Palin has been wrong time and time again. This has started with her prediction that dinosaurs are only 2,000 years old, evidently, with her new prediction that Tunisia is going to be making progress on the front of a new constitution. Many people have been scared, and quite frankly, they have reason to believe so. Because Tunisia was the start of the Arab Spring of 2011. The Arab Spring of 2011 was a collection of unfortunate usurps of government officials, which created a sense of instability. And after 2 years, many people still believe that the Arab Spring isn't over. However, with Tunisia making new progress on the front of a new constitution, it is imperative for us to look towards the prospects of democracy in the country. And with John Kerry hailing the new constitution as progressive and renovative of its time, it is imperative for us to look towards the future and ask ourselves today's question, which is, will Tunisia's new constitution be enough to ensure a sustainable democracy? And the answer to this question is, unfortunately for Sarah Palin, no, for the following three reasons. First, because the United States has had too much of a presence in drafting the legislation. Secondly, because government officials are looking for ways to exploit it rather than work cohesively with it. And finally, because of the fact that when looking towards the prospects of a structure in the economy, or rather in the political aura, we're going to notice that it's not going to be there and unfortunately isn't going to be able to foster a sense of democracy. So first, what we have to look to is the United States' presence within the area and how the United States has been overreaching itself in its jurisdictions. With an article published by the New York Times, dated February 7th, 2014, stating that the United States' presence within the area has been overreaching. And the reason is because the United States has been sending ambassadors within the region to draft the Constitution. Now, the article goes on to elaborate that when looking towards the prospects of stability, we're noticing that the Tunisian people had little to nothing to do with the drafting of the legislation. Therefore, because it's artificially being drafted, the United States' presence within the area is just far much more than it needs to be. Moreover, when looking towards an article published by Al Jazeera, dated January 16, 2014, it goes on to elaborate that the United States' actual perception of what the Middle East needs compared to what it actually does is two completely different things. Therefore, because the United States is creating an artificial piece of legislation that has no type of perception of what reality as well as democracy is to the Tunisian people, we're going to notice that the legislation is unfortunately not going to be able to ensure a sustainable democracy. Moreover, we don't need to just look at what the Tunisian people are being overreached at. We also have to recognize what the Tunisian people are doing to themselves that is going to create a sense of instability. And that is brought about on an article published by Haaretz, dated February 18th, 2014, as it states that when looking towards the prospects of stability in a democracy, we have to realize that all must be in compliance. And this is just not going to be the case. The article goes on to elaborate that many administrators as well as politicians are looking for ways to exploit the legislation rather than work with it. Therefore, there's no sense of cohesiveness being brought about with the democracy. Moreover, when looking towards the prospects of the Constitution, we look to an article published by Politico, dated May 17, 2014, that states that with such a fragile democracy as well as fragile stability within the country of Tunisia, we have to recognize that all have to be bolstering it and fostering a sense of the Constitution rather than working against it. And with many working against the legislation, we're going to notice that there will be no room for the legislation to truly hold its impact. And therefore, because many people are looking for ways to exploit and manipulate the legislation rather than work with it, we're going to notice that those malice intents are going to prevail in the long term. So unfortunately, although Tunisia may have noble intentions of fostering a constitution towards the means of principles of democracy, such as freedom and justice, they're not going to carry out in the long term. Finally, what we have to realize is that there is no structure being built of a democracy in the country of Tunisia. I'm looking towards an article published by The Telegraph, dated, uh, dated January 6th of 2014. We see that when looking towards Tunisia, there's a sense of instability in the sense of unification as well as structure. And the reason is developed in the article as it goes on to affirm that when looking towards the prospects of stability, we have to realize that Tunisia has little to none. And the reason is because there's no structure in the government. Without a sense of structure, without a sense of meaning in the government, there's no sense, or rather, without a sense of meaning in the government, we'll ultimately notice that in the long term, there's a sense of instability. And therefore, because there's no structure in the government, a sense of the sense of democracy being fostered through means of the Constitution will not be carrying out in the long term. Therefore, because the Constitution cannot be fostered due to an instability in the Constitution as well as an instability in unification, we're going to notice that in the long term, it's not going to be. It will not ensure a democracy for the country of Tunisia. So, when re-examining today's question, will Tunisia's new constitution be enough to ensure a sustainable democracy? We can clearly see that the answer to this question is unfortunately no, for the three reasons previously discussed. First, because the United States has had an overreaching part in drafting the legislation. Secondly, due to the fact that Tunisia's politicians as well as administrators are looking for ways to exploit rather than foster. And finally, because of the fact that there is no sense of unification as well as structure in the government. So although Tunisia may have noble intentions, and although Sarah Palin may also have noble intentions, we can clearly see that a democracy in Tunisia may not be prevailing after all.